It started like any other episode of The Tonight Show. The lights glowed, the crowd clapped, and Jimmy Fallon bounced onto the stage with his usual charm. He joked about the weather, did a quick Trump impression, and began easing into his monologue. But something felt off. Jimmy paused mid-sentence, his eyes darting toward the audience, confused. A soft, calm voice spoke from the shadows of the studio. "Brother, may I speak?" The crowd went dead silent. Jimmy squinted. A spotlight turned slowly, revealing a tall man standing alone, wearing a dark olive jacket. The audience gasped before NBC's security could even move. It was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. In New York, no press, no escort, no warning. Jimmy tried to joke it off. Well, this is a surprise. But something about Traoré's presence made it impossible to laugh. He nodded quietly and stepped forward. Jimmy hesitated, then extended his hand. The crowd didn't clap. They just watched, wide-eyed, as history walked toward center stage, and no one, not even Jimmy, was prepared for what would happen next. Traoré didn't sit. He didn't wave. He didn't smile for the camera. He stood at center stage, turned to the audience, and took a breath. "I didn't come here as a president," he began, voice calm but heavy. "I came as a brother, a son, a witness." The cameras rolled, unsure whether to cut to commercial. Behind the scenes, Fallon's producers scrambled. This wasn't on the cue cards. This wasn't rehearsed. Traoré looked around the studio slowly, locking eyes with strangers who suddenly felt like family. "There are children in Africa digging for the minerals that power your phones," he said. "Their hands are small, but their pain is big, and no one sees them." Jimmy stared at him. Something changed in his face. Not fear, not confusion, but sorrow. It was like Traoré had reached into the room and pulled a string no one knew existed. Someone in the audience sniffled. Another wiped their eyes. Fallon's jokes were forgotten. Traoré hadn't come to entertain. He came to awaken. And with just a few words, he had. Jimmy Fallon had always been able to handle anything. Hecklers, awkward guests, even live technical issues. He'd laugh his way through it all. But this was different. Jimmy leaned on his desk, eyes fixed on Traoré. His smile was gone. I don't know what to say," he muttered, almost to himself. Traoré nodded slowly. "You don't have to say anything. Just listen." And so he did. Traoré told a story of a boy from Burkina Faso who once carried water barefoot for his grandmother, of waking up to the sound of guns, of watching friends disappear into silence. He talked about hope, how it lived even in war-torn villages, about courage, how it's not loud, but quiet, like a mother skipping meals so her children can eat. The studio wasn't just quiet now. It was hushed, a sacred kind of silence. Even Jimmy's band stopped playing. Then Traoré turned to Jimmy, looked him straight in the eyes, and said one sentence that made the comedian tremble. "You have the ears of millions, but have you ever heard the ones who cry in silence?" Jimmy blinked. Once, twice, and then his voice cracked. Tears began to form. This wasn't a show anymore. It was a reckoning. The cameraman's hands were trembling, not from nerves, but from the weight of what was unfolding in front of him. Even trained media professionals used to chaos and unpredictability weren't ready for this. This wasn't just television anymore. This was something bigger. Fallon was visibly shaken. His face, normally a mask of smiles and showmanship, was raw now, human. He wiped his eyes but didn't speak. He couldn't. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," Traoré said gently. "I'm here to remind you that pain has a language, even if the world refuses to translate it." And then he turned to the audience, scanning the room. "There is a mother in Bobo Dioulasso who hasn't eaten in 2 days. Not because there's no food, but because the world took her son and gave her nothing back." A woman in the third row began sobbing. quietly at first, then louder. The energy in the studio wasn't just emotional, it was sacred. And yet, no one dared move, because deep down, everyone could feel it. This moment wasn't planned. This moment was meant to happen, and the world was watching. Fallon finally cleared his throat. "Why here, Captain? Why now?" Traoré paused. Then he smiled. Not a performer's smile, but one carved by storms and survival. Because the world only listens when a celebrity cries. And you, Jimmy, the world listens to you. Fallon swallowed hard. Traoré continued. "You laugh for a living. But laughter doesn't fix silence, and too many people, too many children, are trapped in silence." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. It looked old, worn at the edges. "This belonged to Musa," he said, his voice tight. "He was 10. He used to run barefoot across red soil to bring me water. One day he stepped on a mine. The only thing left was this." Traoré unfolded the cloth and laid it gently on Jimmy's desk. The crowd was motionless. Fallon touched the fabric with shaking fingers. That was a child." "Yes," Traoré whispered. A pause, and then the words that shattered the room. "I don't need applause tonight. I just want the world to remember Musa." There were no cheers, only tears. Even the studio lights seemed to dim. Backstage, the control room was panicking. Do we cut to commercial? Do we stop him? What's the legal risk? But the director, an old-school NBC veteran, held up a hand. "No," she said, "we don't interrupt truth." And so the cameras stayed live. Traoré looked out again. "You see me as a president, but tonight I'm just a man who buried too many children, a man who came to ask, how many more must die before your phones lose their shine?" Fallon buried his face in his hands. The band, silent. The crowd, still. Millions watching at home, glued, unsure whether to keep watching or turn away, to stop the ache rising in their chests. This wasn't a show anymore. It was a confession, a heartbreak, a challenge. Traoré placed a hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "You've brought joy to millions. Now help me bring peace to just one village. That's all I ask." Jimmy looked up, voice cracking again. "Tell me how." And in that moment, one man known for jokes and one man known for justice sat across from each other in front of the world, and something changed forever. As the cameras continued rolling, Jimmy sat quietly, staring at the cloth on his desk. The worn fabric seemed to hold every unspoken story of a lost childhood, a stolen future. His usual banter was gone, his laughter silenced by the weight of real pain. Traoré's calm voice filled the room once more. "Musa's story isn't unique. It's the story of thousands. And those thousands don't have a stage, don't have a microphone." The audience sat still, many wiping away tears. Some whispered prayers. Jimmy's heart pounded. A flood of memories washed over him. His own childhood, his family. The times he took simple things for granted. A warm home, food on the table, safety. He realized in that moment how fragile laughter was without the foundation of peace. "I've been lucky," Jimmy finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "But hearing this, it makes me feel powerless." Traoré nodded. "Power isn't given, Jimmy. It's taken with courage. Tonight you have a choice. To use your power to open eyes or to close the curtain." The studio lights dimmed again, as if echoing his words. Traoré reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "This," he said, handing it to Jimmy, "was written by Musa's mother." Jimmy unfolded the fragile paper with trembling hands. The letter was raw, simple, filled with heartbreak and hope. "To the world that watches but does not see, my son was a bright light stolen too soon. I ask you not for charity, but for justice. For a future where no child dies in silence, where their dreams can be louder than the guns. Jimmy's voice broke as he read aloud, each word piercing the quiet studio. The crowd was speechless. Traoré looked at Jimmy, tears glistening in his own eyes. She wrote this for you, for everyone watching. Jimmy closed his eyes, struggling to hold back sobs. The letter was more than words. It was a call to action, a plea from the depths of despair. Jimmy finally stood up, the weight of the moment pressing on him. Ibrahim, he said, voice raw, I've laughed for years on this stage. But tonight, you've shown me what laughter without justice really means. I want to help. The crowd erupted quietly in support. Traoré smiled for the first time that night, a smile born of hope and resilience. Then let's start now, he said. And with that, the tension broke. Tears streamed freely down faces, including Jimmy's. No one spoke for several heartbeats. The moment was too sacred. The world outside the studio would never be the same. Jimmy wiped his tears and faced the cameras directly, the weight of the moment clear in his voice. To everyone watching at home, I promise tonight isn't just about a story. It's about action. About remembering the children whose voices are drowned out by silence. And about using our platforms to shine a light where it's darkest. Traoré nodded solemnly. The crowd cheered softly. This was no longer entertainment. It was a movement. Producers whispered urgently backstage, but no one dared stop the momentum. Jimmy and Traoré began discussing plans, how to use The Tonight Show's reach to support humanitarian causes, raise awareness, and push for real change. For the first time in years, Jimmy felt a purpose deeper than laughter. The studio audience was quiet, but visibly moved. Mothers held hands. Young people wiped their eyes. Even longtime fans of the show felt something shift inside. One woman whispered to her neighbor, I never knew what was happening over there. I always thought it was far away. But now it feels close. A young man, barely holding back tears, muttered, It's like the world's been asleep. Jimmy looked around the room, feeling the weight of every single person watching. He knew this moment could change lives. Traoré's story wasn't just a tale of suffering. It was a story of hope, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of people fighting for a better future. And tonight, that spirit had reached millions more. Then, the moment everyone waited for. Traoré looked Jimmy in the eyes again and said quietly but firmly, If you hear only one thing tonight, hear this. No child should die unheard. Jimmy's breath caught. His hands trembled. The studio was so silent it felt like time had stopped. That sentence landed with the force of 1,000 voices, echoing far beyond the studio walls. The audience rose to their feet in an emotional standing ovation, tears streaming, hearts pounding. Jimmy, fighting to keep his composure, nodded slowly. Tonight, the world had been reminded what true courage looks like. Backstage, Jimmy sat quietly, the applause still ringing in his ears. He reached for a glass of water, but his hands shook. A producer came over and whispered, Jimmy, that was one of the most powerful moments we've ever seen on live TV. Jimmy nodded but didn't speak. He thought about all the times he laughed without thinking, and how little he really knew about the world outside this bright stage. Traoré was sitting nearby, calm but exhausted. You changed something tonight, he said softly. You gave a voice to the voiceless. Jimmy looked at him and, for the first time, felt the true weight of responsibility his fame carried. I don't want this to be just a moment, Jimmy said. I want it to be a movement. Traoré shared a story he hadn't told yet, the story of Musa's dream. Musa dreamed of becoming a teacher, of standing in front of a classroom, helping children learn to read and write. He wanted to change his world with knowledge, Traoré said quietly. but his life was cut short before he could even finish school. Jimmy's eyes filled with tears again. "That's the future we owe every child," Jimmy whispered. "Not just to mourn those we lost." Traoré nodded. "Exactly. And that's why I came here. To ask you to join us, to bring hope where it's missing." The studio fell silent once more, but the air was charged with purpose. Jimmy turned back to the cameras, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "Tonight I ask you, our viewers, to look beyond your screens and remember Musa and all the children like him. We can't fix everything overnight, but together, we can make sure no child's dream is forgotten." Traoré smiled softly. "This is bigger than politics, bigger than fame. It's about humanity." The audience applauded, some standing, many wiping tears. A new energy filled the room, the kind that sparks change. Jimmy's usual closing joke was replaced with a heartfelt plea. "Please don't forget their voices. Help us make them heard." As the final minutes of the show ticked away, Jimmy and Traoré stood side by side. Jimmy's voice cracked. "I never thought I'd cry on this stage. But tonight, I've seen a truth that words can't fully explain." Traoré placed a steady hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "Sometimes the strongest men cry, because only then can healing begin." The studio lights softened. The audience, now a sea of faces illuminated by tears and hope, felt like a family united in a shared promise. Millions of viewers worldwide watched in silence, some with tears streaming, others with clenched fists, ready to be part of the change. The cameras went off, but the story didn't end. Jimmy and Traoré sat together, planning how to use the platform for ongoing change. "Let's make this more than a one-night moment," Jimmy said. "Let's launch a campaign. Funds, awareness, education." Traoré nodded. "Because every child deserves to be heard, and every voice matters." In that quiet backstage room, two very different worlds met, one of laughter and one of struggle, but their hearts beat as one. Weeks later, the world was still talking about that night. Communities came together, donations poured in, awareness grew, and somewhere in a small village, children learned of Musa's dream and dared to dream too. Jimmy Fallon, once a man who made millions laugh, became a symbol of empathy and action. Ibrahim Traoré, a leader from a distant land, became a beacon of hope on the global stage. Together they reminded us all, no child should die unheard, no dream should be forgotten. If this story moved you deeply, please like, comment your thoughts and feelings below, and subscribe to join our community spreading truth and hope. Your voice matters. Help keep this message alive.